It's crazy to think that it's almost been 10 years since the first Destiny game came out, all the way back in late 2014. And one would think that despite trials and tribulations, Destiny 2, with the final shape launching and the great reception surrounding it, that it'd be in a better place than ever, that the IP would continue to thrive. But lately, based on news that's been coming out and reports and recent developments, it seems as though Destiny is actually kind of winding down. Now, Destiny isn't shutting down. It's not dead, but it is dead as we know it, in the sense that it looks like we're not going to see the kinds of expansions we have seen before. And so let's take a look at what we know so far about the current state of Destiny. Obviously, when it comes to players, it's still doing fairly well. It is still one of those live services that continues to thrive in the way it draws in players. The reception surrounding it has been favorable across the board, but the recent layoffs has indicated that things are definitely not moving forward the way you might imagine. It definitely seems like they're downscaling operations for Destiny, despite Bungie having assured when Sony acquired Bungie that there'd be no layoffs all the way back in 2022. We saw layoffs happen in 2023, and most recently in 2024. The most recent round of layoffs was announced on July 31st, 2024, via the following post where Bungie confirmed that 220 roles at Bungie would be eliminated following the success of the final shape. And we're already seeing in the comments here former Bungie employees calling for Pete Parsons, the CEO, to step down because his leadership has truly been, across the board, abysmal. Alongside the 220 who were laid off, 155 Bungie employees who were moved to work for Sony. And then alongside that, we've got around 40 people who were moved from Bungie to this new incubation team for a new studio under Sony to work on this new project. And along the way, we learned that CEO Pete Parsons, throughout the time between Sony's acquisition and now, throughout all the layoffs and all this talk about, just the finances, not being able to support all these developers, we discovered that he spent over $2.3 million buying classic cars. The kind of money and the financial disparity between the CEO, who is, according to many developers, the cause of Bungie's rockier times, and whose leadership has been criticized tremendously by developers pretty much across the board. I can't think of anyone who's come to defend Pete Parsons' leadership. The fact that there's such a pay disparity between this guy, who seems to be more of like a negative influence in the company, compared to all the developers who made the game possible, who worked their asses off with pay that's less than ideal, and then they were thrown away and cast aside when they were no longer of use. It's just egregious. And so we've seen developers speak out across the board, folks within Bungie and even those outside, and there's plenty of archives that highlight the disdain against Pete Parsons, people sharing their own stories and saying that they're digging into this and there's much more to share about Pete Parsons that we don't even know about in terms of his awful leadership, and then combined with situations like some people getting laid off right around the time when their maternity leave was supposed to begin, which just seems rather inhumane. But then alongside all that, there's been other developments that we recently learned about. Like, for example, Luke Smith out of nowhere just deactivated his Twitter, or not deactivated, but deleted everything. There's no profile picture, no banner here, no posts. He just kind of wiped his Twitter page completely. It's still accessible, but there's nothing here. He was the executive creative director for Destiny and Bungie. That is clearly no longer the case. This was indication that Luke Smith was no longer with the company, but we later got confirmation that this was indeed the case. And same goes for Mark Noseworthy, the VP of Destiny and who handled that aspect of Bungie. He has continued to maintain his Twitter page active, and he's posted some stuff since. But since it was confirmed that he was let go, and since all the layoffs happened, there was a gap where he just didn't post anything at all, but he started posting again recently. We eventually got secondhand confirmation that the big two, essentially, one more on the creative side of things with Luke Smith and one more on the business side of things with Mark Noseworthy, were in fact no longer with the company via Jeff Grubb's podcast here the title of which reads, Does Destiny Have a Future?, published 4 days ago on August 1st, 2024. There, Jeff Grubb stated that Smith and Noseworthy were labeled as working on Payback, which is the code name for this Destiny spinoff that was in development before it was canceled. It was going to be the next big thing for Destiny, but not Destiny 3. One thing to note is that Destiny 3 was never in development, but they were working on something else that was Destiny related before its cancellation. Luke Smith and Mark Noseworthy are no longer at Bungie. They were let go. They were caught in the executive and leadership shakeup mentioned in the blog post. Payback has been shelved. Referring to the post here where they said, or where Pete Parsons posted that these actions, referring to the roles eliminated, will affect every level of the company, including most of our executive and senior leader roles. Among those who are caught up in this, it would seem as though were, in fact, Luke Smith and Mark Noseworthy, which a lot of people were shocked to see, given that so much of what Destiny is today is in large part, because of their leadership and them sort of being at the helm of things. GameSpot then reached out to sources and they clarified some details, saying that Smith and Noseworthy's departure came as the Payback project was shut down, after which executive restructuring meant they had no path forward at Bungie. Jeff Grubb also made it a point to clarify that they were not necessarily laid off, but they essentially left due to the leadership restructuring at Bungie. Basically, there was just no place for them anymore because Destiny in general was just winding down, and it was just better for them to move on. And so seeing all this, the perception that it generated for a lot of Destiny fans is that Destiny was basically dead, that Destiny just, had its final big hurrah with the final shape, and then from then on, it would just no longer be that big of a focus. Destiny Nostalgia, for example, tweeted, Destiny 2 no longer getting expansions, Destiny 3 no longer in development. It has quite literally never been more over than it is now for Destiny, and this got millions of views and tens of thousands of likes. But again, it's important to note, Destiny 3 was never in development. This other project that was codenamed Payback, it's almost like a spin-off. It's not Destiny 3, so that's something to note. And it's not that Destiny 2 is no longer getting any content ever again. It's just no longer getting those large-scale expansions. Jeff Grubb kind of delved into this, and Forbes transcribed what was said in that podcast. Grubb says that Bungie will move away from its current content format with no more large-scale expansions. They're not even using the word expansion internally anymore, referring to new drops as content packs. A separate, unconfirmed leak outside of this says the yearly plan is now 2 content packs and 2 seasons, and no more weekly story time gates. And then there's additional details about Sony wanting to assume direct control of Bungie, it no longer being its own autonomous entity under Sony, but rather it being under the purview of SIE's CEO, Herman Hulst. So we're seeing Sony sort of start to take over and take Bungie in the direction that they deem fit for the company. For better or for worse, I guess we'll see what happens with the launch of like Marathon and other projects that they have going on. Apparently, a big part of why this restructuring is happening is because Sony, now they believe they overpaid for Bungie, and Bungie delivered less than what Bungie's leadership said they could deliver to Sony. And so they're trying to pivot in ways to make Bungie more profitable for the company. So, for example, the Lightfall expansion, that apparently had a 45% revenue miss when it came out. And that revenue miss was in part what instigated the 2013 round of layoffs. And then when it comes to the final shape, apparently, while it wasn't unsuccessful, it didn't reach the expectations that the corporate heads had. Sources apparently say that the final shape, which was a big hit critically among critics and fans, it was outsold by Lightfall, at least within its launch window. The expectation is that every new expansion will significantly outsell the previous one, showing a certain level of growth. But the final shape apparently, like in terms of its pacing of sales, was even slower than that of Lightfall's, at least within the launch window short term, and that generated concerns. Though Forbes notes here that there was likely no level of success that could have been reached to avoid what's currently happening based on long-running problems within Bungie. So it seemed as though there was just a lot of managerial aspects to Bungie that has been building up over time, and the final shape being mega successful wouldn't have fixed those things. So all of this, what's happening right now with Bungie, would have on some level been inevitable anyways. Jason Schreier also confirmed that every expansion has kind of sold less and less with every new release, as outlined here by Forbes' compilation of information we have about this whole situation. Jason Schreier said in his article that each expansion has sold less than the previous one for a while, so they're not doing paid expansions now. He also provided details about what Payback was supposed to be. It was not supposed to be like Destiny at all. In fact, it was primarily a third-person game featuring co-op play and solving puzzles with characters from the franchise, more akin to Warframe and Genshin Impact. So definitely something more off-kilter, but within the IP that they were hoping would kind of spark new interest in the brand as a whole. But they decided that it was just not worth the financial investment. And then in an additional article, Paul Tassi from Forbes decided to kind of take his time, talk to some sources, and relay further information about future plans for Destiny. So apparently the plan is to release 2 content packs per year. One content pack that is bigger in content additions, but not quite expansion sized, that may or may not be free. It may be like sort of cheaper expansions, essentially, that's less in scale, that's smaller in scale, but apparently there's no confirmation as to whether that's going to be paid or not. But at the very least, the second content pack within a given year that's going to be smaller additions, that will end up being free. And the hope is to at least give the players some kind of excuse to come back and do some activities and hopefully spend on microtransactions to be able to at least maintain the game. And between those content packs, they might have little bite-sized bits of like episodes that they'll kind of throw in there along the way. But generally speaking, the idea is less sprawling one-off campaigns and a greater focus on replayable activities, the hobby aspects. So it's more focus on engagement elements of the game instead of, those big sprawling set pieces and campaign moments and the big story developments that we're used to seeing from this IP. So with Payback canceled and Destiny winding down, what does Bungie have cooking? Well, there's of course Marathon, and then there's another project titled Gummy Bears, or at least that's the code name. That's apparently a MOBA with Super Smash Bros. Fighting game elements that's supposed to be really fun based on what sources are saying. There's details about why Destiny 3 never came to fruition. Destiny's just like a really expensive venture to maintain, and making Destiny 3 apparently was considered too risky in the current market. And so the idea was to take the Destiny IP and have smaller projects and more manageable projects kind of split across the board. And there's also the element of like the audience base of Destiny skews towards older players, and they're trying to appeal to younger crowds as well, which is why they're kind of trying to spread to more game types. That's not just the mainline Destiny games, hence why Payback was kind of a thing they were considering before its cancellation. But at the end of the day, like Destiny 3 was never in consideration because Destiny 2, that by itself was already just such a pain to try to manage, from a financial standpoint, and to build a Destiny 3 in this market was just too much. And so they were trying to kind of finagle it in a different way. But on numerous fronts, especially where Payback is concerned, that didn't work out. And so it seemed as though Destiny as a whole is just kind of becoming a secondary element compared to those new projects that they're pursuing, whether it's Marathon or Gummy Bear or, incubation projects within Sony. And then finally, we have some more details about the layoffs and how a lot of developers feel lied to. They were told that, the final shape was make or break, and they made it and it was successful, but they still got laid off. So they just feel like they were deceived because apparently even success is no guarantee that your job is safe. And now apparently the mantra for Marathon is also make or break, but once that game becomes successful, I have little doubt that Bungie will still give the finger to the developers who made the success of that game possible if it becomes successful. There's talk of how Bungie is forever tied to games as a service. They're never going to make like a single player game, and the departments that were laid off and gutted include much of QA, which is now outsourced to people who are unfamiliar with even basics of the game. So yeah, great. That should bode well for the quality assurance of future projects. It just sounds like a whole freaking mess, and just dismantling of a lot of talent and experience that should be nurtured for the long-term health of the studio, but this feels like the typical descent we see that will have the studio scrambling for talent, and that will, in the long term, lead to just more troubled developments and more chaotic development pipelines. But yeah, this is kind of the situation, ladies and gentlemen. Destiny is not dead. It's not going to completely shut down. It's still going to receive content additions, but you can very clearly tell that its maintenance now is a lot smaller in scale, and that the Destiny model that we knew as we knew it, the expectation of large-scale expansions and campaign-driven experiences that can also be tackled via multiplayer, that kind of large-scale support we saw for Destiny is over, and it's easy to imagine that content creators are going to move on from Destiny because it's just no longer just all that exciting to cover the kind of content that Destiny's going to get. And, I guess they're going to ride on Marathon being kind of successful enough to be able to make that their main focus for content and all these things. But this feels like a slow decay for Destiny to pave the road to ventures that Bungie and Sony feel will be more profitable and more financially viable and will draw in new audiences to their IPs. Is the vibe that I'm getting, but that's one man's take. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the current state of Destiny, of Bungie, what you think about Sony and Bungie's plans and the reorganization of and the restructuring of leadership and the ventures that they're focusing on. Do you think this is the right thing to do, or do you think this bodes rough tidings for the future? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.